Barrie.
Hello, and welcome to Between Sets with Church. Today we sit down and chat with a local musician. He is a graphic artist, a web designer, and now we can say a publisher. Today's guest, Mr. Sean Alten. We are here in beautiful downtown Barrie, meeting up with a good friend, Mr. Sean Alten, and to discuss a little bit more about his music career, his now published book, and what's going on in your life. So, welcome to the show, Sean. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
It has been a while.
It has been quite a while.
So let's go back a little bit to your musical history, because that's kind of where everything kind of started. Were you originally from this area? I knew you lived in Toronto for a little while, I knew the Vancouver thing, but originally from the Barrie area?
I came up from Toronto in the 80s, if that's dating myself. I guess that would be a migration up from the city. Down there I was involved in DJing and hip-hop community and that kind of thing, and then I just kind of moved up here economically with my folks and got away from the city. It was starting to get a little too chaotic. And I moved up here and started playing guitar up here and had some friends, played some music, started some bands.
That's where I started. Did you, obviously you started off with guitar, when did you switch over to bass? At what point was that?
Well, what happened was I was in a band, and like all bands come to an end. A band came to an end where I was playing guitar, and a friend of mine, Shane Heath, had approached me and said, I'm starting a new project and I need a bass player. And I said, I don't really know how to play bass. He said, but you know how to play lead guitar, so you could probably do this. So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I did. And then that kind of evolved into being a focus of which I enjoyed. More than playing guitar, I more enjoyed playing bass. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, do you prefer bass over guitar?
Yeah, just, you know, it's unassuming in the back kind of thing, but it's also just, I guess it's loud, and it's kind of a different kind of loud.
Yeah.
Body moving kind of loud, I guess.
Are you still teaching? I know at one point you were teaching a few years ago. Are you still involved with that at all?
Not now, no, not at this time, just because the place that I was working at closed up, and there's a couple of other places in the area that are doing really well, but I decided to kind of take a step back from that just because it was really diluting what I was doing, in a sense of my creativity was all over the place at that point in time. I was working a lot and in bands and teaching, and it was just taking up too much of my time to I guess still be involved within it.
Yeah. What do you got going on now, music-wise, as far as solo project bands? What's current? What's coming up?
There's not really much, in a sense of I'm not really doing anything on my own. I'm kind of working with some friends on a project that's going to be out sometime, I guess this year. I'm not too sure. Maybe next year. Other than that, just kind of taking it easy, getting back into the swing of things now that everything's opened up again. I guess all eyes are on performing and playing music again, so I guess there'll be talks around with some friends of mine about starting something up.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it seems like things are slowly starting to get back into a good pace again. You mentioned DJing, because we both have a bit of a history with that. Tell me more about when you got into the DJing side. And before I get into that, I must say to you as well that you are probably one of the most diversified DJs I've had the opportunity to listen to, from Tarantino to funk, soul, old school hip hop. You're very well educated, and you certainly know your material quite well. But let's get into a little bit about your DJing stuff as well. That you used to do it quite a bit more at the Fox. Was kind of, I guess, the last of it.
Yeah, that's something that was just more along the lines of wanting to still keep the party going, an idea, and bring in my knowledge of what I know about music and what I enjoy, and bringing it to people. A lot of what I brought was just music that I liked, as well as what other people liked as well. But you know, in the funk side of things, I brought a lot of that to different kind of parties where people weren't really familiar with it. I tried to always think about music that was people who were there would enjoy, as well as what I could introduce them to that was something they might not really know. Because it was always associated with bands, I would try to accompany the band material with whatever was performing that night. It was a lot of fun doing that and just introducing people to different kinds of music, either older music or new music, depending on what it was.
It's a nice buzz when you're able to do that. Someone comes up and goes, "Hey, man, that was cool. What was that?"
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely been surprises where I've brought music and somebody has been enthusiastic about what I was playing and asking a lot of questions.
Crowd reading, I guess it's a big part of it too when it comes to that. Whose body language, etc.
Yeah, there was a lot of that kind of an idea. I mean, you definitely try to figure out your audience and not just cater to them, but also try to entertain them as well and surprise them, just make them feel like they're having a fun time while they're waiting between bands or just out for an evening with some drinks.
Nice. I want to talk a little bit about your graphic design, because we will get to the book eventually. I want to talk about it, like when you got into graphic design and what influenced you to get into the magazine work, apparently, because we had done some work together in the past with Vortex, and I think prior to that you had mentioned you were working in Vancouver at High Times, I believe it was.
Cannabis Culture.
Cannabis Culture. I was close. I had part of it right anyway.
It's the U.S. version.
Yes, exactly. Can you tell us a little bit more about your start into graphic design?
Well, I was out west for a while doing some things, and then I decided to start working back in graphic design, kind of like really put my foot down and say I really want to follow this path. I started working in a music advertising store and moved to a magazine, Cannabis Culture, because I had some friends who worked there. I had worked there before in another department, but then I started working in their magazine department as production and graphic design. Did that for about 4 or 5 years, I think, at the time, in the late 90s. It was a lot of fun, met a lot of interesting people. It was good being part of something that I felt was deserving of attention, either be with it, the politics of it, or just the culture of it. Now that it's illegal, it's a different kind of mentality. At the time, it was kind of shunned upon. I didn't really talk a lot about to specific places about the company that I worked for, but after a while it became apparent that it didn't really make a difference. And it was a lot of fun people that I worked with, an enjoyable community out there. Then I came back here and started working with some promoters because of music again, getting involved with music and art, always wanting to do posters, getting to that kind of context. Was just coming back and meeting some friends again that I had known in the early 90s. And they were involved in the music community here, so they kind of...
You came back at a great time, too, because at that time the foundation was going full tilt, and I mean, there was so much great live music going on all through town, too. So, yeah, it was a great time as well for you to return back.
Yeah, there was that. There was Fitzy's as well. Those two places were basically really the forefront of where music was. The kind of bands that were coming to both were either underground or mainstream, depending on who was bringing them. There was different promoters in town bringing different bands in and around. That kind of helped really solidify the area as a place where bands wanted to come, not just a place where they wanted to travel through, because there was starting to become a lot of good shows were happening here, I guess, in the late 90s and the early 2000s. It really started to solidify itself as being a tour stop on the way through Ontario.
Cool. We gandered through some of the old Vortex magazines a little while ago. I knew we'd get a chuckle out of some of that. We had some great times with the magazine. Was there any highlights from that, or anything you learned from working with the Vortex that you hadn't done before? Like, was the rock and roll magazine kind of new to you?
Yeah, that really was too. I think it was one of the main things was it was very loose. It wasn't a very rigid type of, organization.
Yeah, we weren't your typical office setting.
But in the essence, that kind of made it really exciting, because the people that were there because of their passion. They weren't there for any amount of celebrity or anything like that. It was bringing people in that were excited to talk about or report on or write stories or photograph the environment that we were, that Barrie was producing. Mm-hmm. The musicianship that was happening here was starting to become noticed as well. Some of the artists that we had on our cover in the beginning were more local, and then we started to get into bigger acts.
Yep. Yeah. Did you notice any difference with the bands that you're working with now as compared to in the past, as far as the posters? Like, are you getting the same kind of relationship with the bands that you had? I guess it's kind of getting to like when you design a poster, for instance, what's going into your thought process? Are you looking at the band's history? Do you look at the music,
definitely.
hear the music, and then do research on them? And because I know with us anyway, there was times I thought, he's looking right into my mind, this guy. You've done it a few times, but yeah, you definitely nailed so many posters. And what homework do you do, or what thought process goes into the designing of a band comes to you and wants a poster done?
Well, first off, I just listen to the bands that are playing to kind of get an idea of what imagery they're presenting. A lot of lyrics tend to always have imagery associated with them and how we interpret what we're listening to. A lot of it was that. A lot of the bands would say sometimes provide me with a couple of songs, or they'd say, here's our artwork, just something to give me an idea of where to start. Very few people tend to come at you with, this is what I want. Everybody tends to come at me with, I know what you can do, here's a show, here's who's playing. And I would look at it in a sense of not just the music that it was presenting from the artist, but actually how the genre was being reflected, in the sense of how can I make people understand just from looking at a poster what kind of music was being played, as well as the bands that are being played. So try to create a kind of like a setting for them to expect when they walk in the front door, and not be surprised by it, not putting children's toys on a heavy metal poster. Although that would work, sometimes it does, but for the most part it's trying to line up the creativity that I have with the output of the band and what kind of music they present.
What's the feedback been generally with their posters? Do you pretty well nail it 100% most of the time, or do you get the odd client that goes, no, can we change this, and
Sometimes yes. For the most part, no. I think because a band kind of hires you or hires myself for what I can do, and they know that they can kind of like leave me alone and let me make their promotional material for them. Or sometimes when I've worked on other things beside posters, it becomes a little bit more back and forth, because it's a different kind of project, say an album cover or a CD jacket or a t-shirt. There's something specific that they're looking for. So there's a different kind of connect there, whereas they'll say, here's an idea of what I want, can you organize this idea for me? Posters tended to be more, go ahead and have a free reign with it, just because they could see the art that was being created, as well as they had other things to deal with, and they just kind of were like, you take care of this, I know it's in good hands. So it was more of them having a confidence level in me and trusting that I'm going to represent them properly. Very few people have come at me and said I missed a mark, just because I guess I do my research and listen to their music and really get a vibe for what I'm trying to portray with the band.
You said other aspects that the bands are involved with as far as promoting themselves. A lot of bands will rely on their posters and their handbills from the old days. But I know you also are a web designer and build EPKs, etc. Can you tell us a little bit more about that side of the business that you do, that you provide, and as well to the importance of it for especially younger bands or people who are just kind of starting out in the business?
Well, I think the idea of a website for a band, or the idea of some kind of online presence for a band, is really important nowadays, because that's where a lot of people can see you. They get to know who you are. Rather than before the internet, you really had to kind of search out radio stations and friends and learn how to connect that way with music. Now people have such a far reach, so they can build their brand or their band and their image behind it effectively online. So I can help them come together, build a website, or help organize their online presence through social media, or even through ideas such as Bandcamp or those kind of pages. They do allow some customization. So in some of it, it's more consulting with the band and trying to understand and ensure that they get a cohesive image. Sometimes they tend to think of them as separate items, where it's really just their brand and their representation. What do they want to present themselves as? How do they want to present themselves? What kind of imagery they want to use that relates to their music? So a website or EPK or Bandcamp or Spotify, some of them are necessary evils, such as Spotify, but Bandcamp tends to be a little bit more generous with their site, because they give back to the bands on certain days, or they were doing that over the pandemic. They kind of gave all sales to bands on Bandcamp Fridays. So I would work with bands and kind of help them develop an online presence with their image, and some bands that are younger might not have a good idea of how to think about all of those different options, because there's a lot of options and it can become overwhelming at points.
Yeah.
So I help them to try to narrow down where they want to focus and how they want to focus, and give them information as to how to propel themselves as a band.
I guess a lot of it too is probably the follow-up on it. I mean, it's easy for, I shouldn't say easy, but I mean, if you put something up, or they put something up with you or whatever, and it's up, and then there's, I find a lot of bands will just leave it at that, rely on that as their main source for people to come visit them. Meanwhile, not following up with, you know, communication with emails, etc., or updating their websites. Can you expand a little bit more on the importance of that, of bands doing their part, not just you doing building the EPKs, etc., but them doing their part as well, to part of the follow-up, basically?
I think that's where you have to look at, some bands do that. They put up an album, or they put an album out and then they just leave it, and that's it. And they don't really work on marketing themselves or thinking about how to excite the audience, because it's not just the music as well. There's also the visual aspect that brings people in. Specifically online first, you have the ability to share your music, but something has to draw them in. You can draw them in with the music, or you can draw them in with visuals attached to the music. People are still going to look at it from a point of, you know, how are they introduced to you? So sometimes it's important for bands, if they want to keep progressing, to change up their look or change their appearances, or and say how their website or their electronic press kit looks, or what it's connected to, updating music. Some people tend to, again, put up one thing and then just leave it, thinking that that's a solution, whereas some people are very conscientious of how they're constantly being portrayed in the public eye. They want to make sure that there's music out there all the time, so they're always looking for visuals to accommodate their music. We have a new single out here, we have a cover for the single we might need, or we're having an album, we're going to put an EP out, or a cassette out, and we need some visuals to accompany that. Some bands are very conscientious, again, once they start to really understand that it is about self-promotion and how you perpetuate your success.
So let's get into the book, A Spectacle of Color, Volume 1, a collection of gig posters by Fly Graphics by Sean Alten. This is awesome. I'm so glad you did this, because there's so many, probably 20 years worth of work in behind putting this together. First question is what drove you to put this out? What drove you to get to this point?
I had some friends before mention to me something about putting a book out, just because it was kind of like you should put all your posters in a book and put it out. And I was kind of, I don't have the time, or I just didn't have the mentality of it, I guess, at that time. Really, I wasn't really interested in it. And then when you're getting to the pandemic happening and everything closing down, it kind of gave me an opportunity to really start to think about it. And I really was watching music slowly dissolve online, and I really didn't want that to happen. I really wanted to kind of put something out that reminded people that we had a lot going up in this area. And the places that bands have played, some of the places aren't even around anymore. True. And that also brought about that aspect of it as well, as trying to collect
history.
History of different places. I mean, the Clarkson's not around anymore, Fitzy's is not around anymore, the Fox is unfortunately gone as well. The different places that have been around, C'est La Vie isn't around anymore. There's places that had some great talent come to that I really wanted to showcase and put together. So I had the opportunity of having some time off to sit back and look at what I wanted to put together, or how I wanted to put it together. Did a bit of research and kind of picked the ones I liked the most out of all of them.
Nice. Yeah, I see I got a couple of good plugs in there too. Thank you. Some DJing stuff and brains and stuff, etc.
Yep.
How did you choose? Because obviously, what's in this book is over 100 pages. There's probably God knows how many more that you probably could have chosen. And I know even from the stuff I've got hanging on my walls, some of the old posters you've done for me are absolutely timeless pieces. But
thank you.
Was it hard to make the decision to narrow it down, or did you have to narrow it down to so many, or could you have made it thicker?
Yeah, I could have. I think I was trying to look at something that I could present to people at an affordable cost, as well as something that would be interesting. And did have a lot to choose from. For sometimes I had, I mean, even for the Clarkson alone, I did 2 posters a week for a year and a half. That's just a lot of work there. So I definitely had to choose through it, and I was stretched for the pages I had to kind of pick. The amount of pages dictated how many I could pick. I could have made it bigger, but then it would just start to become more and more pricier, and I kind of wanted to keep it affordable to the musicians that I felt I want to, represent as well. So it did take me a bit of time to go through, a couple of weeks, to actually look at everything that I had and find some of the stuff I had lost. Some stuff is lost just because of hard drives or things disintegrating on you. So I did have a lot to choose from. It was really kind of a process, almost like I really like this one and this one, which one do I pick? And that definitely took sometimes I left things out that people looked at and said, hey, what about this one? You didn't put that one in there. And I said, oh yeah, I forgot about that, or it didn't make the cut. Other ones went instead. There's a couple in there that are actually shows that never happened.
Oh yeah? Oh,
because
okay.
they were for what was coming up, and then everything stopped. So I put them in kind of like to show that aspect of, there's also these things that had happened that were supposed to happen that didn't because of the way we had spent the last year and a half.
Yeah. Are you planning another one? Curious.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah?
I have started doing posters again. Shows have started up again. I've been approached by some people to start working on some more. So there's some other things I'm trying to work on that have to deal with the historical aspect of shows up here with the promoters. I'm thinking of putting something together.
Yeah. With the technology change over the years, because I remember when I went to college, it was copy and paste, and it was all that old school stuff. And I remember you working with the Macs, especially, was the kind of the trademark for the industry. But how has even working with Macs changed over the years to make your job easier? Or has the technology changed much over the last few years, or is it?
Well, I think a lot of the technology has definitely made it easier to do things. So the cut and paste or letter sets that we were putting together in the past, I mean, that's all we had. So you had to be very, creative in a sense of where you were getting your resources from. Now there's software, there's resources, there's online resources for everything. You can find any piece of pictures or any kind of information you want. Technology has become available to a lot of different people. Younger kids are starting to get on board and do their own promotional work, realizing that it's also an aspect of promoting their band. So a lot of people are doing and getting into that. And it's because of the computers and how they've moved over the past 10 years even with social media. It's starting to become, I guess you would say, accessible to anybody. And because of that, it's helping the industry grow a lot quicker. Some people aren't ready for it. Some people are, grasping all of the technology that they can, really trying to be in the cutting edge. So there has been a different kind of approach over time. That was how I put things together, like again, letter sets or collage, cut and paste, photocopies, even the programs themselves getting better and, being able to put things together quicker. Rather than taking hours and hours, you can put something together pretty quickly and get it out and online.
When you have a band that contacts you, they say, I want this poster. Now, do you look at the type of music that they're playing? Let's say, would you have certain images or something in mind for like metal bands compared to rockabilly? Or do you know what I mean? Like, do you have kind of a preset idea as to where you're going to go with it when certain bands contact you?
I think, yeah, there's always a kind of a preconceived idea of what the genre of music is like. So a lot of ideas will float through my head at the beginning until I listen to their music, and then it becomes more narrowed down as to what imagery works. There's definite feels for the music, but I think nowadays, it's like we mentioned earlier, you can almost put any imagery anywhere, and people will, just as long as it's eye-grabbing, they'll look at it. So in that context, there are ideas where you can go right ahead and say, stick to imagery that works well with a specific genre, say rockabilly, where you're looking at older cars or slick back hair and the outfits, or metal where it's dark imagery, a lot of, that's, in that that kind of aspect, most people associate those things.
Yeah.
Punk's got a lot of energy, so anything that's energetic and raw, sometimes political, or in that aspect. Definitely there's a point where I try to reflect that in what I'm doing.
Yeah, I remember I have a book at home. I should have brought it actually, and it was basically old punk posters from the 70s and 80s and it was you could almost tell because it was basically hand-drawn marker, kind of a setting to it. Is there a secret, like with using colors or certain dimensions when designing a poster, or there's like do you use subliminal? Not subliminal messages, but I mean like colors that you know that work in specific situations, or colors that work that will pop out compared to a standard poster. Have you tried playing around with any of that? It's kind of a...
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there's definitely that kind of theory comes into it. I mean, I went to school for art, so a lot of that idea comes into it. Some things you can't escape, just the way that color works for us. The way that we look at different things invokes certain kinds of emotions, and that you learn how to use those emotions for advertising. But in that aspect, yeah, there's definitely color schemes that work better that I'll go to first. Or if I'm trying to look at something that's wanting to stand out, sometimes it's looking at where is this going to be presented? What are the other pieces that are going to be there? How do I get mine to stand out? How do I get this poster to stand out and effectively make a statement? A lot of it, some people who are in the beginning stages of it tend to really work hard on making it look good, not realizing that communication is the key, and you're trying to present a communication. You can't, you can't overwrite the bands that are playing, where it's happening, the date it's happening, as being less important than an image. Some images people tend to understand and it draws them in. But for the most part, that's what you're really trying to get at, because people are specifically driving around neighborhoods. They're going to see a poster up. You want to make sure that they can catch the idea of it pretty quickly. Unless it's going to be, specifically a niche band that definitely has an appeal and marketing all to it, then you work on that level, and that's a tie-in to the idea of marketing a specific product, like a new CD release. So everything has to be cohesive, and people will start to identify the cohesiveness. Oh, that's that band. I can recognize that from their new artwork of their poster or their album or whatever it is. In that context, yeah, I guess you could say that colors really do dictate where I'm going.
Yeah. I can't thank you enough. It's been an awesome interview. Great to see you again, Sean. Thank you very much for being on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you.